Welcome to Table Talk, a place to gather, guide, and go.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Right. Welcome back to another episode of Table Talk, a place to gather, guide, and go. As always, I'm joined by my host, Alyssa DeLosSantos.
Hello.
And we are so excited to be coming to you today because we are celebrating and recapping our first season of Table Talk.
Yay.
Cue the balloons and
Yes.
the confetti. But we were just saying before we prayed ourselves in and before we started recording about how, like, even watching this past season ourselves wasn't painful. Yeah, we noticed little nuances and different things that each of us want to improve on. But we were talking about how our not only our relationship, but our conversation deepened and really focused on the table and this sense of community that we've wanted to create and are creating. And it's exciting because myself, I see all the behind the scenes work because I do most of the editing and I do all the uploading and all of that. But I was so excited to see, like, even just our viewership upticking. And no, we're not like massive amounts of viewers every month, but we know that we're reaching people. And, we were just saying as you, Alyssa, prayed us in, that we reach those who need to hear us. And we reach those who wanted to have a seat at the table. And that's really been our goal since the beginning. And for this episode, we wanted to kind of highlight some of our favorite moments from the past 7 episodes and kind of take a little bit of a glimpse forward and also open an invitation for our viewers and soon to be listeners, as we are going to also be released as an audio podcast. So I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, that's so fun. It's so fun to look back and see the growth and our whole dream for this space, right, was to acknowledge the power and the gift of community and to make a place where we can connect. And we've discussed that throughout this entire season, which it's so fun to think we've accomplished a season. That's so impressive. Like, yes, I have almost like no skills. So by that, I mean technology and this sort of thing. So to grow now into the next season and to having also audio available, that's just awesome. But I did love, just as we went through the past month and kind of looking at where we have been in conversation and where we have been in community and where we've grown, I just saw this common theme of reminding each other. That's what we do in community. We remind each other that God's desire through the entire narrative of Scripture was to restore us to Himself and then to restore us to community. And I just heard that from every episode in season 1. And I'm going to tell you, today's a day that I needed to hear that. I just needed to be reminded that that's His desire for us.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was just talking this morning with a group of women about how one of the things that we are called to do from Jesus Himself is love one another. And I mean, here we are, 2 women who have met over the internet, who have never sat down at a table together ourselves, and yet still able to have this conversation and build this sense of community for those who may feel forsaken, or for those who may feel thirsty, or for those who may feel hungry, or for those who just don't feel like they belong anywhere. And to build this sense of this table that we know Jesus would have a seat at. To me, just it my heart just grows immensely, even just saying those words. And,
Mm,
I get this sensation, this warm feeling of just love and acceptance. And also, a sense of pride because we're also not only being blessed by each other and by our viewers and by our message, but also thinking that we are being a devoted
mm,
and gracious and welcoming host to
mm.
others, to me, gives me all the warm fuzzies on inside.
Absolutely. Listen, I've got more feels than I anticipated today. So let's just go there together. Jill, over and over, before we launch into the highlights of the episodes, over and over, we have talked about the true power of community, that the need for community, the desire for community, the fear of community. We've addressed what keeps us from community. And not so long ago, a dear friend of mine was teaching a lesson that was just so profound. I thought it just slides just beautifully right into where we're going. And that is, she talked about this concept of buffalo mentality. And there are a lot of things I am, but there are many things I am not. One is like good about animals. I mean, I'm an okay dog mom. You know what I mean? Like I'm hardly surviving that. But so buffalo, I mean, I don't have a wide repertoire of that. And she began talking about this concept of buffalo mentality. And as she spoke, I thought this illustrates the strength of community, because maybe you don't know, but when a herd of buffalo see a storm coming, they, however buffalo do, kind of like discuss among themselves. I know that's a weird descriptor for a buffalo, but however that works, again, I don't work at SeaWorld. I'm not affiliated, obviously, with any zoo or so on and so forth, but they make a decision about essentially what are we going to do. And unlike cows, who when a storm comes, they run away from the storm. That's why there are often cows on the side of the road where they don't belong, because they've busted through fences in crisis. Buffalo join together and charge into the storm, because the concept that of this buffalo mentality is that facing the storm and running through it will be a momentary trouble to get to the other side, versus running away from it. When you run away from a storm, the storm is essentially chasing you. And I sat there with this concept and I thought, oh my goodness, right? By running into the storm, they minimize the storm's impact. But also think about this, they're not alone. They make that decision to face a storm, to go through a storm with people within their herd. So I'm going to translate that to community. This is why we need community. There is strength in us locking arms with each other and facing the problems that arise. And as we know, they will arise. And this is the essence of pushing through issues versus pushing issues aside. This is why we need community. This is the whole point of table talk.
I love that because as we've talked about before, somebody who has not that herd mentality, but that scatter and
Yeah.
weather the storm on my own strength. And,
Mm.
as we've been, yeah, right. As we've talked about in every episode this season, both of us have experienced those times, but it's when we come together, when you have that herd mentality.
Mm.
And, I've said this before and I don't know if I've said it here, but I know I've said it in other places, is that yes, Ephesians, Paul calls us to put on that armor of God.
Mm.
But what happens when we're in a storm where that we don't have the strength to do that? And what we need to do, what we have to start doing is relying upon our community to put on our breastplate, to put on our helmet, and or to even just not even worry about our armor, but then be the armor around us.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it sounds very similar to what you were just talking about with that, where I'm sure that there's weaker members of the herd where,
Right.
those are either on the interior or even possibly towards the back. And there's going to be times when we're leading the charge, and there's going to be
Mhm.
times when we are just trying to weather the storm. And I think that this past season, we really dug into that a lot of that with each other.
Mhm. I agree. So where did you see that in episode 1? What did you pull out of episode 1?
Okay, so first of all, just being my flesh self and human self, I'm never wearing that sweater again, and I promise my viewers that. But
Oh,
um,
that's great.
yeah, but really just thinking about that definition of what community is.
Mm,
And also, I think for me too, it was, and this was something you didn't see, but you probably, if you paid attention, you saw the nuances as we progressed through the season, was having that foundation of it is a safe space.
mm,
And it's okay to, because I mean, let's face it, we were very vulnerable
mm,
with some of our personal stories that we've shared, and making sure that this table was a secure table
mm.
and a safe space to be able to share that.
Yeah.
For me, really, and like I said, you probably didn't notice it, but I think that as you look through the season, if you watch the episodes, you'll see that progression of that trust build. And so
Yeah.
I think for me, it was really just coming and having a seat at the table.
Mm.
And I'm, right back at you. What was it for you?
It's funny, I wrote a couple things down in episode 1 because I really just listened. I just listened to be fed, right? And I heard things like the table nourishes our bodies and our souls, and that was our desire. That each of us has experienced not having a seat at the table. Each of us has experienced not feeling welcome, or feeling like too much or too little or not needed or disqualified. And that we wanted to create this space so that really we could see the fullness of God together, right? Because we each carry a piece of the heart of God. And so extending an invitation and pulling up a seat at the table is really about, let's see the fullness of God. I also had to chuckle because, you know, I share in episode 1 about a Shark Week episode and about really that power of when they were doing this experiment, that one decoy seal by itself would get struck by sharks. But when there was a group of decoy seals tied together, they were less likely to receive the attack. Not that they never received the attack, that's not the point, but they were less likely when they were together. And I needed to hear that story again today. I needed to hear it last week. I need to be reminded of it often, because my instinct is to go into isolation, which we talk about in further episodes, but we're vulnerable when we're isolated. And I'm just letting that ruminate kind of even today, um, that I know other people feel that way.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because for me, episode 2,
Mm-hmm.
and because you're smiling because I still talk about it with you, is that whole sleep, creep, and grow. Like I because you know what it felt like? It felt like I was coming out of a season of sleeping and coming into a season of creeping. And now I
Mm,
feel like I'm in a season of growth. And one of the things that stood out to me that you had said, and I'm going to read it, was that we um, we are uh, we're not elevating truth. We are stuck in being a victim.
mm,
And for how many of us are stuck in that sleep cycle of
right.
being a victim, when
Mm,
what we're being called to do is to creep out of that and come into a period of, it may feel like slow growth. But then there's also a period when you feel like, okay, yes, I've got this and I can grow from it. And one of the other things was that, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself in my notes. Sorry.
Oh, you're going to go into a new episode. Okay, good. Well, yeah, I really loved that also. And if you remember, just even learning of that plant theory, I was actually sitting around a table when we hadn't gathered with people in a long time, and I was sitting at a table and I needed that too. And it absolutely resonates me. I love the concept of elevating truth over tradition, because my tendency was to, I found myself, I think I shared a story in that episode about finding myself really like taken with my role and not really nurturing my relationship with the Lord. And that's a gut punch when you realize something like that. But and we talked about adjusting ourselves from worn paths to establishing new ones. And that's so much hard work. And so that's why that plant theory was so valuable. We also talked a lot about the woman with the issue of blood, and she just like, she is me, and so that just, I thought about that, about showing up in different seasons, however we can, and it's okay. And having permission that sometimes we're going to have to come out into the crowd. Sometimes we're going to have to take the risk and reach into the crowd and be healed in a public way. And that's the gift of community. I also love that we talked about the need to show up for people who feel ostracized, like she no doubt did, and being a voice for the voiceless. And I love a quote in that episode from that we shared from Beth Moore: anything that makes a home in our brains finds a way to our bones. That'll go a long way. Just to ponder that. What am I putting in my brain because it's making its way in my home? And is it true? And is it good? And you, community, right? You in community, for me, can say, that's not really landing well, Alyssa. And if I don't give you that permission, if I don't come out into the crowd, when will I learn that?
Yeah. And, I think we also talked about in that episode, there's times where we are coming to the table crawling.
Absolutely.
And just hungry for crumbs.
Yes.
And, just like that woman with the bleeding condition, she was crawling beneath the crowd just to touch Jesus's cloak. And that to me, and the other thing that came up in that episode was the fact that, and we talked about it in further episodes, but it really hit home with me with that, was there's no name given.
Yeah.
And at any point in time, we can attach our names to that person, to that experience. I mean, we talked about it. How many times have we come crawling to the table?
Yeah. Innumerable.
Just seeking healing or seeking, community or seeking whatever, or even just crumbs, just some type of nourishment. And it just, that's a good one.
Yeah, so good. And then we went into episode 3 where we, talked about some things that, again, is like, I needed it right now. We talked about how trauma can create trust issues. You talked about, Jill, rocks of shame that you kind of carried along the way. You shared a very tender part of your story about finding yourself pregnant and not knowing kind of what the days ahead were going to create for you. We talked about the way that shame keeps us hiding and pushes us to the perimeter, pushes us sort of away. Even if we're still showing up in community, we're kind of staying along the edges, right? Which led us to talk about the man with the withered hand. And I love that story. I love that shame tells us to stay where no one can see you, and God calls us right out into the middle. And one of the things that we shared in that episode that was so profound to me is that we often want to restore others without receiving the restoration ourselves. And so often that restoration happens in community, and that stepping away from shame requires courage. And I've really been sitting with the shame message and all that we talked about in that episode. So powerful when you shared your story, Jill.
Yeah, and it also just once again proved to me the power in being vulnerable. Because, we pick and choose what we share, who we share it with, how we share it. And I really just, as I said in that episode, I opened up that closet and, really shared with that. But one of the things that really stuck with me, again, was something you said, because you've got these nuggets. You've got these nuggets, girl. You had said, guilt says you did something wrong. Shame says you are wrong.
Yeah.
And that is so true, because so many of us carry that weight, or as I refer to it, as that backpack of rocks of shame with us, that we allow that to remind us of how we are wrong. But when we see what Jesus did with that man with the withered hand and calling him to the front on the Sabbath in the temple, say, no, uncurl your hand. Like, to me, like that episode, I listened to that episode a couple times because there was just so much wisdom in the trajectory that we talked about of moving out of shame and moving to the front of the temple and being that person that's being called up front and thinking, okay, this is going to be just one of those times again. And it isn't. And it's then just leads into that whole episode we did with transformation.
Right. Yeah. Episode 4. We talked about how in episode 4, we talked about how sometimes transformation is immediate and sometimes it's kind of prolonged. And looking at the conversion of Lydia, which was an immediate transformation, versus the woman with the issue of blood, which I would call prolonged. Now, in the moment where she touched Jesus, it was immediate, but for 12 years, we discovered that she tried things in her own strength and her own way. And it's just a shame we can't identify with doing things in our own strength or nature. And so that would kind of seem prolonged, but we also talked about this concept of what we aren't changing, we're choosing, and that transformation can in fact be scary. It should be a thorough and dramatic change, and just those words alone sound like work, and transformation is work, and it's hard work. And so sometimes we don't want to do it because it feels too hard, but sometimes we don't even know we need transformation. Again, power of community, right, is to say, hey, I'm going to walk with you through this. Transformation is about choosing a better story. Transformation is about stepping out of isolation. Anytime is a step toward transformation. And I think it was important in that episode. We also talked about that we're called to the table even in our brokenness. Like, while we are yet struggling, we don't have to clean up or fix up. It's now. The time is now for community.
Yeah. One of the things we also talked about was being comfortable in the uncomfortable. And, I think too, when, at least for me as an educator, when I think of transformation, the first thing I think about is caterpillar to butterfly and the whole chrysalis and all of that goes along with it, and how uncomfortable it must be for that caterpillar in those stages to be comfortable in that uncomfortable transformation. And it's the exact same thing for us.
Yeah.
one of the things you had said too is it requires work,
Yeah.
and it it truly does. And
Mhm.
it transformation is not only about being comfortable in the uncomfortable, but it's also about what we look like, what we
Mm,
say, what we think, what we feel on the other side of that
mm,
transformation.
mhm. Yeah, and if we'll put in the work, if we'll go the distance, we get to see what's on the other side, right? We get to experience life in a different season, and which makes it worth the work. And what's funny is we followed into episode 5 where we talked about sitting before you serve. And it fits so smoothly now looking in hindsight, right? Because we're talking about do the work of transformation. It's hard work. And sometimes we avoid the hard work by doing work. Isn't that funny? As I was looking back at those, I'm like, yeah, sometimes we allow our worth to be entangled with our service. And so we just start to serve the needs of others from a starving soul because we think this is where our value is. And so instead of sitting with the Lord and doing the hard work of transformation, I'm just going to work my tail off and hope to be noticed and valued. And that was a really good, important word in episode 5. And I wrote this quote down from episode 5. Serving from a starving soul is a subtle and socially acceptable idol. Do you feel like that should be tattooed on your forehead or on your forearm? Like, I think I need to read that again. Right?
Absolutely. And it's so funny because I wrote down the whole savior complex
Yeah.
and how we just get too busy to serve ourselves and to
Mm,
feed and nourish ourselves.
mm,
And what then we're pouring into others is not the living water, but the water we
yeah.
get from a faucet or a well.
Yeah. Right. And so it doesn't fully satisfy. And we have to keep replenishing that because we are going to the wrong source.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I was just reading something this week that that's exactly what the Samaritan was doing when she returned to that well every day in the middle of the day, was that she
Mm,
was keeping trying to fill that well. But what we don't realize, and one of the nuances of that story, of that part of the Bible, is that she left her cistern at the well
mhm,
and you never hear of it again. And
mhm.
that is just so true of us with our faith and with coming to the table and with serving others.
Right.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So good.
And now, oh, the
Hmm.
one that I needed to hear that I
Yeah.
had so many takeaways from
Yeah.
was episode 6 when we talked about community, allowing community to carry us instead of condemn us.
Yeah.
And, that whole ask, acknowledge, and accept.
Why is that like varsity level difficult? No, let's put this right. Why is that like Olympic level difficult? Right? We can often acknowledge, but to ask and accept help, we declare as a sign of weakness when God says, this was always my design. My design was that community would carry you. Will you let community carry you? Ooh, we could repeat that over and over. I could repeat those questions to myself over and over.
Absolutely. And, like we said, you've said it before, like each one of these spoke to us in a season that we were in. But for me, this
Mm,
one is one that just keeps repeating itself because, quite honestly, that asking is the
hmm.
hardest part.
Don't I know?
It's hard. And then the acceptance. It really, that episode has resonated with me over the past couple months because
Mm,
it's the space that I find myself in right now.
yeah.
And yes, I'm filling my cistern like we just talked about. And yes, I'm serving others. And yes, I know that I'm in a season of growth, but also having the strength to say,
Mm,
you know what, I'm struggling and I'm
yeah.
struggling today, or I'm struggling right now, or I've been struggling for the past whatever X amount of time.
Yeah.
But then to then just give in and
Mm,
accept the
mm,
love and the outpouring of community and support that's being offered is so important.
right. We talked about in that episode, I think, the SS Fitzgerald, and how when they had these major dilemmas, like they were about to sink, and the nearby captain radios and says, "How are you with your problem?" And the captain of the Fitzgerald says, "We're holding our own." And what you're saying is just such a good reminder that we weren't called to hold our own, and that, yeah, surrender is difficult and it's hard. I mean, so hard because we just want to do it ourselves, by golly. And yet holding our own hasn't turned out so well for us. And we can't hold our own into eternity. We're incapable of that. We needed Christ to come, and we needed to say, I surrender. I cannot do this on my own. I've been trying and it's really not going well. And I need a community to carry me to the Savior, like the paralytic man. I need that. I need people, I need my community to push through obstacles when I can only see obstacles like, hey, it's a crowded room. I can't get through the door. I need my community to say, forget the door. We're going to make a new door in the roof, right? We're going to lower you to what you need. I want to be surrendered to that. And that's what I kept ruminating in episode 6. I just kept ruminating on that thought. Like, will you let community carry you? Actually, will you show up for community in the first place? Because a community can't carry you if you're unwilling to show up, if you're unwilling to acknowledge the need, like you said, and then not just acknowledge the need, ask for assistance, and then accept the assistance that's being offered, whether that's relationship or prayer or a meal, right? Whatever that looks like. So important.
Yeah, and I also think like how we are the roof and how all of those different layers need to be peeled back until you can get to the heart to be in front of Jesus,
Mm,
the Savior. And how often we put all those different layers on ourselves and on our personas and on our hearts, where that we need that community in order to say, oh, no, 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 no. We're going to find a way and we're
yeah,
going to peel back all those layers and make a
yeah,
way.
yeah. That's good. It's vulnerable and
Yeah.
necessary. We see this theme continue throughout, that community is hard. Okay, there are many things that keep us from community, but what never keeps us from community are cupcakes. I'm just saying what mostly keeps us from community is the hard work, right? Because cupcakes, we are there for that. It's funny, we went into episode 7 talking about our limiting beliefs, talking about the thing that keeps us. What is keeping us from community? What's keeping us from relationship with the Lord? What's keeping us from relationship with each other? And this idea that a limiting belief might very much be that. One thing I wrote down was that we've got, what we took away from Paul and Barnabas was that we've got to let others close enough to be able to testify. Like, we have to give people access to our story. And what keeps us from that, you talked about a limiting belief, so powerful, a limiting belief because you experienced abandonment by your biological father, that you took that new belief that was created in that space, that men could not be trusted. And you said you saw that ripple in your relationship. But the juxtaposition of that I loved is that you also said, but when you were willing to let that go, to surrender that, to work through that, you saw an impact in your other relationships. That's a word. When we will surrender the thing that has kept us held back, it will have a ripple effect. And I think you illustrated that so beautifully in that story. I'm so grateful that you shared that to help us work through our own limiting beliefs.
And I think you also shared that something similar a couple episodes before that when you talked about when you were at some of your lowest points and your
Mm,
girlfriend showed up and you were just getting out of a shower and you said, just come into my bathroom. Like
yeah.
you threw aside all of those limiting beliefs about here's how I'm supposed to look and here's how I'm supposed to
Mm,
present myself and all of that. And
true.
we talked a lot about that country club mentality
Mhm.
and, that how we're supposed to look and how we're supposed to act and how,
Mm,
we can only get acceptance if.
mhm.
And the beautiful thing is that Jesus removed that if,
Yeah.
and it's acceptance.
Yeah.
And all we have to do is accept him. And then,
Mm,
we ourselves will be accepted into this beautiful
yeah.
blessing of a kingdom.
Mm,
The other thing we talked about is scars being our storyline.
yeah.
And,
Yeah. Mm,
again, it's going back to that vulnerability
mhm.
thread that's being woven all throughout.
Right?
um, but how it's not a bare single
Mm,
strand of a thread. It's actually a woven piece of beautiful um, string that is going to then tie into this magnificent, you know,
yeah.
curtain. And
Tapestry. Hmm.
thank you, tapestry. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I was envisioning while you were talking. I'm like, tapestry. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that that's
Mm,
been our goal here also is to
agreed.
show that your scars, my scars, everyone else's, all of our viewers' scars,
Mm,
are part of our storylines.
yeah.
And we can leave that FOMO behind.
Yes, please.
Yes, and we can leave that thought of what did we say in that one episode? I'm fine, we're fine, everything's
Everything's
fine.
fine.
Yes.
Everything is not fine, right? I mean, are you breathing? Everything is not fine right now.
Yeah.
Right?
But we can, toss that to the side and
Yeah.
really I think that one of the things that stood out for me with this whole season was
Mm,
the authenticity.
mm,
And when you show up to the table
mm.
being authentic
Yeah.
in that, you know, yes, I am made in the image of God. I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
Mm,
When you show up authentically being that and you're bringing your tapestry of your scars to the table is
mm.
when that real community starts to be established.
Yeah. You go deeper. You can't help but go deeper, right? It's the unfurling of the hands. It's saying, I'm going to surrender the broken pieces so that I can grab on to something greater and something new. And yeah, Jill, not every community is going to work for us. Not every table is the table that we have been invited to, but we, instead of waiting for the community we think we want, it's time to just lean into the community we have. Who's showing up? That's where we need to continue to lean in. And that's difficult. But again, hard work. We keep talking about vulnerability and hard work. And it's no wonder that our the reports of loneliness are the highest that they've ever been. The numbers of people experiencing loneliness, the numbers of people, the number of people who are taking their lives, it should alarm us as people who have been loved by God, It should alarm us. It should make us open our eyes and say, where can I reach in, and who might need a seat at the table, and to be aware. We need to increase our awareness, because community is Christ's answer to loneliness and isolation. It's Christ's answer. It's always been his answer. It was always, community was always God's design. And so we're going to continue in this space because it's a calling. We are called to community. And so we're going to do that, right? But I think it would be fun. What do you think, Jill? I would love to hear from any of you who are gathered around the table with us. I would love to hear a takeaway. Was there a particular nugget that you grabbed onto in any of the episodes, 1 through 7, or this one? Maybe you didn't listen to the other ones and you listened to this one and thought, I'm going to go listen to that now. Was there one that you took away that you just really loved? We would love it if you would reach out to us, leave a comment below the video, and let us know what were your takeaways. This is how we grow. We've got to communicate in community in order to grow.
I love it. I love it. And I would also love to hear, like, what do you want to see us talk about within this community? We've got some plans for season 2, which I'm very excited about. And when we've been talking about tables, and like for me, I always think of this beautiful farm table that's made from reclaimed wood, and everybody has a seat at. I have that vision in my head. There's times when it may be only a table for 2. And
Right.
what does that look like? And so,
Right.
we were talking a little bit about like the whole theme for season 2. And, I think that we've both settled on banquet and bistro. Because
Yeah.
there's times when you're at this big, beautiful table with all of this luscious food around you. And there's times where it's a quiet, intimate bistro table for 2, maybe 3, with
Yeah.
maybe some little tapas on the table, or
Right.
maybe a bowl of queso in your case.
Always queso in my case. Yes. Yes. Yes to queso.
And what does that look like? And
Yeah.
both are good.
Mhm.
And how do we break bread differently when we're seated at those tables?
Yeah. Yeah. I can't wait to dig into that, because you're right, it's an and I can't wait to discuss, together, when am I at the banquet table? When am I at the bistro? How do I balance one versus the other? Because I can show up at a banquet table over and over and never grow in intimacy. Because I can hide. I'm real good. I'm an introvert. I'm real good at being a wallflower. Okay. Like, I was there, I did just enough to be seen, and that's it. So this is going to be such a great conversation. I literally can't wait to launch season 2. And I'm just super grateful for the times that we've had around the table so far. And I know I'll keep coming back for the leftovers. I will. It's good. It's some good nourishment. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, I hear you. And, I'm the Martha. I'm the one who's preparing the meal. I'm the one who's serving everybody. I'm the one who's constantly busy. So I'm interested to see what it's going to look like when I sit down at that smaller, intimate table. But also, too, and we talked a little bit about this because we originally thought that we were going to say banquet to bistro.
Yeah.
And we decided, no, there's room for both. And
Yeah.
I think next season, we're really going to be able to unpack that little shift in word choice,
Yeah.
and that bigger shift in just table size.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good.
So excited!
Can't wait.
I know, me too.
Yay.
All right, friends, make sure you click that subscribe button so you never miss an episode, because we are getting ready to gear up for season 2, and we definitely want you to come have a seat at
Yes.
whether it's at our banquet table or our bistro table. There's always room for you. And so also don't forget to connect with us on social media, and don't forget your go for this month. Let us know, what were your takeaways, or what do you want to see us talk about? Because we would love to hear from you and we love engaging with you.
Yes.
All right, my friend, this has been fun.
So fun. So glad. Can't wait for the next one. Here we go. Thanks,
All
guys, for
right.
joining us.
Thank you. And until next time, don't forget, there's always space at our table at Table Talk for you.